Tonight, we drift back to a quieter world before screens glowed and messages crossed oceans in an instant. The room around you is dim, peaceful. The faint hum of your own devices softened by distance, and as you settle deeper into your pillow, we turn the clock gently backwards, toward a time when communication moved slowly, like a letter carried by a ship. For centuries, if you wanted to speak to someone far away, you needed paper, ink, and patience. Messages crossed mountains by horseback and oceans by creaking wooden hulls, taking weeks or months to arrive. Even when they did, they could be lost, misunderstood, or arrive too late to change anything at all. Merchants waited for news of prices in distant ports. Families waited for letters from travelers, and leaders waited for reports from their envoys. To live with distance was to live with delay. You learned to send messages early, to choose words carefully, and to accept that by the time a reply returned, the world might already have changed. Then, in the 9th century, thin wires began to crisscross continents, and the telegraph arrived, carrying dots and dashes of Morse code. For the first time, a message could leap across land in minutes instead of days. The world felt smaller, but it was still fragile and slow compared to what would come. Telephones followed, giving voice to distance, but each call tied one line directly to another, like placing a single board across a stream. Networks grew. Cables stretched under oceans. Switchboards clicked through the night. And yet everything remained tied to circuits that opened and closed, connecting and disconnecting with each call. As you breathe slowly now, the world we are drifting toward is still years away from anything called the Internet. But the need that would create it is already there. The need to share information quickly, reliably, and in ways that would not break when one wire snapped or one building went dark. The idea of a new kind of network, more flexible, more patient, more resilient, is beginning to form, quietly in minds that most people will never meet. In the late evenings of that earlier age, you might have heard the soft hiss of a radio as it swept past distant stations, voices and music skipping across the atmosphere, fading in and out with the weather. Broadcasts could reach many listeners at once, but they flowed in only one direction, from a single tower to countless ears. If you wanted to answer back, you still needed pen and paper or a planned telephone call. So tonight, as your own room grows quieter and your breathing settles into a gentle rhythm, we pause here at the edge of that world. The tools for instant two-way communication do not exist yet, but the longing for them does. A quiet question beneath the clatter of typewriters and the crackle of radio. Surely there must be a faster way for information to travel, a way that does not tire, does not forget, and does not mind how far it has to go. Far beneath the noise of the 20th century, wars, radio broadcasts, new highways and jet engines, another, quieter revolution was preparing itself. In laboratories and secretive offices, people were learning how to make machines that could follow instructions written as numbers. Early computers were huge, filling entire rooms with cabinets, cables, and spinning reels of tape. They were loud and temperamental, but they could perform calculations that would take humans days or weeks, finishing them in minutes or seconds. During the Second World War, these machines helped decode encrypted messages and calculate trajectories for artillery. Later, in the 1950s and 1960s, they were used for scientific research, business accounting, and government record-keeping. Still, each computer lived mostly alone, like an island of logic surrounded by a sea of paper and filing cabinets. If you wanted to move information from one machine to another, you might carry a stack of punch cards across a hallway or ship magnetic tapes across the country. There was no simple way for computers to talk to each other directly. No shared language for communication, no standard roads between them. At the same time, the world was entering the long, tense years of the Cold War. Military planners worried about what would happen if a key city or communications hub was destroyed. If all your information flowed through a small number of central points, then losing those points could be catastrophic. A single failure could ripple outward and leave people cut off. So, in the background, two needs began to overlap. On one side, scientists and engineers wanted computers to share data more easily, to send files and messages electronically instead of through trucks, planes, and envelopes. On the other side, strategists wanted a communication system that could survive damage, one that would root around broken pieces instead of collapsing. Tonight, as you rest, we drift closer to the moment when those needs begin to meet. In quiet offices filled with hums and clicks, a new idea is forming. An idea that will change not only how computers talk to each other, but eventually how people talk to one another as well. Imagine for a moment a single long road connecting two cities. If that road is blocked, the journey stops. This is how most communication systems once worked. Direct, simple, and fragile. Now imagine a web of small streets, alleys, and side paths. If one route is closed, you simply take another. The journey may change, but it continues. This image of many possible paths instead of just one became the seed of a new way of thinking about communication. In the 1960s, researchers in different countries began to imagine breaking messages into tiny pieces that could travel independently across a shared network. Rather than setting up a dedicated line for each conversation, the network would carry many small chunks of data, packets, intermixed, each with its own address, like envelopes in a crowded mailbag. An engineer named Paul Baran in the United States wrote about distributed resilient networks, where information would automatically seek alternate routes if some nodes were destroyed. In the United Kingdom, Donald Davies explored similar concepts and used the word packet to describe these units of data. Others, in universities and research agencies, refined these ideas and explored how to make them work in real systems. The basic principle was elegant. Instead of one fragile path, many flexible ones. Instead of a single continuous stream, countless small pieces. Instead of a central, easily broken structure, a distributed net that could bend without breaking. For ordinary people at the time, nothing about daily life seemed different. Phones still connected one call at a time. Televisions still used analog signals. Newspapers still arrived each morning. There were no headlines about packet switching, no evening broadcasts about distributed networks. But beneath the surface, in technical journals and quiet conferences, the blueprint of a new kind of network was taking shape. It did not yet have a familiar name, but its outline was clear: a system that would move information with calm persistence, even when parts of it were damaged or overloaded. Tonight, we keep following this thread from idea to experiment, and from experiment to the first small pieces of a network that would someday circle the globe. To turn theory into reality, someone had to build a working network, not just describe one on paper. In the United States, a research agency called ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, took on this challenge. ARPA funded cutting-edge work in computing and communications, bringing together universities and laboratories that were exploring the frontiers of technology. The goal was simple in words, but complicated in practice. Connect their computers so they could share data, programs, and expensive resources. 4 sites were chosen for the first version of this experimental network, which would be called ARPANET. One was at UCLA in California, another at the Stanford Research Institute nearby. A third was at UC Santa Barbara, and a fourth at the University of Utah. Each location had a different type of computer and its own operating system. To connect them, engineers designed special interface machines, small, rugged computers dedicated to carrying data between the local computer and the network. These were called IMPs, Interface Message Processors. Each IMP would act like a local post office, receiving messages, splitting them into packets if needed, and forwarding them along leased telephone lines to other IMPs. In 1969, the first links of ARPANET came to life. At first, the network was tiny, just a handful of sites sending simple messages at speeds that today would feel incredibly slow. The rooms that housed the equipment were unremarkable: racks of hardware, cables, humming fans, paper logs on clipboards. Yet, within those rooms, something new was happening. Messages were no longer confined to a single machine. A program at UCLA could send data to a computer in Utah. A researcher at Stanford could access resources stored in Santa Barbara. Distance, at least for these machines, was beginning to matter less. Few people outside these circles paid attention. The world had other headlines, other worries. But for the small group building ARPANET, each successful transmission was a quiet sign that this new way of moving information could actually work. As you lie here now, surrounded by your own devices, you are living with the mature version of an idea that started with these modest links, these careful experiments, these late nights in fluorescent-lit labs where the future of communication first blinked into being. There is a small, almost accidental moment in the history of the Internet that people still remember, and it begins with a simple word: login. On an October evening in 1969, researchers at UCLA attempted to connect to a computer at the Stanford Research Institute over one of the first ARPANET links. Their plan was to log in remotely, something we now do without thinking, but at the time it was new and delicate. Sitting at their terminal, they typed the first letter, L. They checked with their colleagues at Stanford. "We see the L," came the confirmation. Then they typed the next letter, O. Again the signal traveled, and again Stanford responded, "We see the O." The moment they tried to type the third letter, G, the system crashed. The connection dropped, and their message, which was supposed to read "log in," was cut off at LO. 2 letters, a tiny fragment of a word. Yet in that small failure, a quiet success was hiding. A message had traveled from one computer through the ARPANET to another computer hundreds of kilometers away. The link worked, even if only briefly. Data had flowed across a network instead of being carried in a box or on paper. The next day, they tried again, and the login succeeded. There were no journalists watching, no crowds cheering, just a handful of tired researchers watching text appear on a distant screen and realizing that something important had changed. Tonight, as your own messages travel invisibly across continents in fractions of a second, you're living in the long echo of that LO, the first faint syllable of a connection that would eventually encompass millions of machines and then billions of people. What began with 2 letters has grown into an entire digital universe. Once the basic connections were in place, ARPANET began to grow, and with growth came new habits, new tools, and new ways of using a network that had started as a technical experiment. One of the most important developments was surprisingly human. A way to send messages from one person to another, not just from one computer to another. In the early 1970s, a programmer named Ray Tomlinson experimented with software that could deliver electronic mail between users on different machines connected to ARPANET. To distinguish between the person and the computer they used, he chose a symbol that was rarely used in names, the A sign. A message might go to user a machine, indicating both the individual and the host where they could be reached. It was a small detail, but it gave shape to something new, email, as we now recognize it. Email spread quickly among network users. It became a natural way to share updates, coordinate projects, and send short notes. Mailing lists emerged, allowing groups of people to discuss topics together, their messages threaded through shared inboxes. In these text-only exchanges, early online communities were forming long before social media and instant messaging. What had begun as a tool for sharing computing resources was slowly becoming a social space. People sent jokes, holiday wishes, and informal comments alongside research papers and technical questions. The network was no longer just about machines talking to machines. It was about people talking to one another through machines. Still, ARPANET remained a small world, mostly limited to researchers, students, and government workers. The general public was largely unaware that any of this existed. But the pattern was clear. Build a network for one purpose, and humans will fill it with their own voices, their own stories, their own sense of connection. As you breathe gently, you can picture those early terminals glowing in dim offices late at night as someone reads a new email, a few lines of text arriving from far away, proving that a network of computers can also be a network of human beings. As ARPANET expanded, it met a new challenge. It was not the only network anymore. Other computer networks were beginning to appear. Academic systems in different countries, specialized networks for certain research communities, and later, networks run by private companies. Many of them use their own protocols, their own rules for formatting and transmitting data. If each network remained separate, the world would end up with many isolated islands of connectivity. You might be able to talk easily within one island, but jumping from one to another would be difficult or impossible. That was not the vision forming in the minds of some engineers and computer scientists. They imagined something larger, a network of networks, a way for different systems to connect while still keeping their internal designs. For that to work, they needed a shared set of rules that all networks could agree to when talking to each other. Two researchers, Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, worked on this problem. They developed a family of protocols that would allow diverse networks to send data between them reliably. Their design focused on splitting information into packets, giving each packet addressing details and handling lost or reordered packets in a systematic way. They called this family TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol and Internet Protocol. TCP would ensure that data arrived correctly and in the right order. IP would define how packets were addressed and routed from one network to another. The beauty of this approach was its flexibility. TCP/IP did not require any specific type of underlying network. It could run over phone lines, satellite links, radio connections, or fiber optic cables. It did not ask everyone to rebuild their systems from scratch. It simply offered a common language for them to use when they needed to interconnect. Tonight, those four letters, TCP/IP, might sound distant and technical, but they quietly shape almost everything you do online. They are like grammar and punctuation for digital communication, keeping billions of tiny messages moving in an orderly way, even though you rarely notice them at all. On January 1st, 1983, something subtle but profound happened in the story of the Internet. This date is often called Flag Day for the network. It was the day when ARPANET officially switched from its older protocol, NCP, to the newer TCP/IP standard. Before this, different parts of the network had used different methods to communicate. Afterward, TCP/IP would become the common language for connecting not just ARPANET, but many other networks as well. The transition required careful preparation. System administrators updated configurations, installed new software, and tested connections. Machines had to be ready to speak the new protocol by a specific time, or they risked being left behind. There were no fireworks, no crowded ceremonies, just quiet work carried out by people who understood that this change would enable the network to grow. Around the same time, the National Science Foundation in the United States created NSFNet, a high-speed backbone network linking supercomputing centers and universities. Other countries developed their own academic and research networks. Commercial networks were beginning to appear too, hinting at a future where the Internet would not be limited to government and academic use. The word Internet, short for Internet work, began to be used more widely to describe this growing web of interconnected systems. It was still small by modern standards and still mainly used by specialists. But the architecture was in place: shared protocols, multiple networks, and a culture of collaboration among the people who built and maintained them. For most people in the early 1980s, this world remained invisible. Home computers were just starting to spread. Connecting to anything beyond a local machine often meant dial-up modems and specialized services, not open Internet access. Yet the foundation was ready. All that was missing was a simple, intuitive way for ordinary users to move through this interconnected space, a way to click, read, and explore without needing to memorize addresses or understand commands. That next step was already taking shape, quietly, in a physics laboratory in Europe. By the mid-1980s, the Internet as an infrastructure existed, but it did not yet feel like a place where you could simply browse. Finding information meant knowing exactly where to look, which server housed a file, what path to type, which commands to use. Tools like FTP and Telnet allowed experienced users to log into remote systems and retrieve data. But these tools were not designed for ease or comfort. There was no single unified space of information, just many scattered repositories. At CERN, a European physics laboratory in Switzerland, scientists felt this problem every day. They came from universities across the world, collaborated on large experiments, and constantly needed to share papers, diagrams, and notes. Their information lived in different systems, in different formats, often hard to find unless you already knew exactly what you needed. A British computer scientist at CERN, Tim Berners-Lee, began to imagine a gentler way to connect all this information. He thought about hypertext, documents that could contain links, simple references you could follow from one piece of information to another, no matter where the documents were stored. If you could combine hypertext with the Internet's global reach, you might create a universal reading room, a web of documents linked together, accessible from anywhere. To make this work, he proposed three key components: URLs to identify resources, HTTP as a protocol for requesting them, and HTML as a simple language for structuring documents and embedding links. He called the system the World Wide Web. At first, It was a modest internal project at CERN, meant to help physicists manage their overflowing documentation. Berners-Lee wrote the first web server, the first browser, and some of the first pages himself. There were no images, no videos, no ads, just text and links, forming a sparse but powerful network of knowledge. Tonight, as you lie here, you are surrounded by the descendants of that experiment. Sites and pages and services built on the same basic idea that any document can point to any other, that knowledge can be interwoven into a web that stretches quietly around the planet. In the beginning, the World Wide Web was small, almost fragile. The early browsers were simple, often running in text-only terminals. Users navigated through lists of links, selecting one to move to another document, then another, stepping through the web one page at a time. The experience was new but still somewhat technical, a tool mainly for researchers and enthusiasts. Then, in the early 1990s, more user-friendly browsers began to appear. One of the most influential was Mosaic, developed at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications in the United States. Mosaic could display images in line with text, not just as separate files. It ran on common personal computers with graphical interfaces that felt familiar to people already using Windows or Macintosh systems. This changed the feeling of the web. Instead of looking like a collection of plain text files, it began to resemble something more like a digital magazine or bulletin board. Pages could include pictures, headings, and basic formatting, inviting casual exploration. As Mosaic spread, new websites appeared: university homepages, personal projects, small business sites, early news pages. People experimented with color, layout, and simple navigation menus. Soon, companies like Netscape built on Mosaic's ideas, releasing browsers that were faster, more polished, and easier to install. The web's growth became exponential. What had once been a tool for a narrow group of scientists transformed into a public space open to anyone with a computer and a connection. Directories and early search engines tried to keep up, organizing and indexing a rapidly expanding universe of pages. Behind this colorful surface, the old machinery still did its work. TCP, IP routing packets, DNS translating names like example.com into numerical addresses, servers receiving requests and sending responses. The complexity remained hidden, tucked away behind simple gestures. Typing an address, clicking a link, watching a page appear. In the soft darkness around you now, it may be hard to imagine how magical that first experience of the web felt to many people. The sense that, with a few clicks, you could wander from a lab in Europe to a library in America to a hobbyist's page in Asia, all without leaving your chair. Beneath the metaphors of webs and clouds, the internet has always depended on very physical things. If you could lift the surface of the oceans like a sheet and peer underneath, you would see thick cables resting on the seabed, crossing basins and ridges, connecting continents. Inside these submarine cables, bundles of ultra-thin glass fibers guide pulses of light that carry most of the world's international data. Specialized ships lay these cables, slowly unspooling them across thousands of kilometers. Engineers plan routes carefully to avoid undersea hazards, and protective layers shield the fragile fibers from pressure and accidental damage. Along the way, repeaters, small amplifying stations, boost the signals so the light can travel long distances without fading. On land, cables rise from the sea into landing stations, then spread outward along underground ducts and overhead lines. They run alongside highways, under city streets, through rural fields, and into large buildings called data centers. Quiet, carefully controlled spaces where servers are stored. Inside a data center, the air is cool and dry. Rows of metal racks hold servers that blink with small indicator lights. The constant hum of fans and power supplies blends into a steady background noise, like distant wind. Power systems ensure that even if the grid falters, the machines keep running. Network switches and routers move data between racks, between rooms, and out to the wider world. From data centers, fiber continues its journey outward, branching into residential neighborhoods, office towers, schools, and shops. Sometimes it remains as fiber. Sometimes it changes to copper cables or coaxial lines. But the principle is the same, a path through which packets can flow, turning physical distances into something that can be crossed in milliseconds. As you breathe slowly, you might imagine this network as a kind of global nervous system, signals racing back and forth between distant points. But unlike a biological system, this one is built and maintained by people, upgraded piece by piece, expanded whenever someone decides to connect a new building, a new town, a new shore. Above the cables and buried lines, another layer of the Internet floats through the air itself. Radio waves and microwaves carry data across cities, over hills, and between towers, on rooftops, along highways, and dotted across open fields. Cell towers quietly listen and transmit, their antennas pointed and tuned to serve the devices around them. Your phone, resting nearby, is one of those devices. Even when it seems still and silent, it may be exchanging tiny bursts of information with nearby towers, checking for messages, confirming its presence on the network, staying ready. Wi-Fi routers, tucked onto shelves and in corners of homes and offices, take wired connections and share them wirelessly within a local space. Their signals are invisible and silent, bouncing off walls and furniture, filling rooms with connectivity that most people notice only when it disappears. Far above, satellites in orbit add yet another layer. Some relay high-capacity links between distant ground stations. Others form constellations designed to bring Internet access to remote regions where laying cables would be difficult or expensive. They receive beams of data from Earth, process and forward them, and send them back down in carefully timed patterns. For a user, all of this is reduced to simple icons, a set of bars indicating cellular strength, a small symbol for Wi-Fi, perhaps a tiny arrow showing that data is being sent or received. The complexity dissolves into the feeling that information is just there. In reality, every message you send rides on a chain of carefully coordinated signals, light and fiber, radio in the air, switching decisions in routers and base stations. The same basic idea persists through all of it. Your data is broken into packets, labeled with destinations, and handed from one point to another until it reaches where it needs to go. As you exhale, you can let those details recede, knowing that the intricate dance of waves and photons will continue on its own, quietly, while you rest. As the underlying network became more capable, the way people used it began to shift from occasional visits to something closer, to continuous presence. In the early days of home access, most users connected through dial-up modems. To go online, you would pick up the phone line, dial a number, and listen as the modem translated digital data into patterns of sound, chirps, hisses, and static. Being online was a distinct activity, something you began and ended. Often, you could not use the phone and the internet at the same time. With the spread of broadband connections, cable, DSL, and later fiber, the idea of the internet changed. It stopped being a place you went for a short period and became more like a utility, always available in the background. Your computer could stay connected all day, quietly syncing email, downloading updates, and loading pages without lengthy dialing routines. Websites evolved as well. Instead of static pages updated rarely, they became dynamic and interactive. Scripts running in browsers and on servers allowed content to change based on who was visiting and what they were doing. Pages could remember preferences, display live information, and respond instantly to user actions. Databases and server-side applications turned websites into full-fledged services. Online stores, banking portals, media libraries, and collaboration platforms. Search engines grew more powerful, indexing billions of pages so that a few typed words could retrieve information from almost anywhere in the world. Social spaces emerged where people could post updates, share photos, and connect with friends and strangers. The web was no longer just a collection of documents. It had become a living environment of applications and communities. Through all this, the same humble mechanisms continued to work behind the scenes. Packets, protocols, cables, and routers scaling up to handle more traffic, more users, and more complexity. Tonight, as you lie quietly in your room, the connection around you feels effortless. It is easy to forget how recent this always-on world really is, and how carefully its foundations were laid, one protocol and one cable at a time. The arrival of smartphones made the internet feel less like a destination and more like a layer wrapped around everyday life. Early mobile phones could handle simple text messages and brief calls, but their data capabilities were limited. Screens were small, connections were slow, and browsing was awkward. Yet even then, the promise was visible. The idea that the network could follow you instead of waiting for you at a desk. Over time, wireless standards improved. Third generation, 3G networks brought better speeds, then 4G made streaming and rich media practical on the go. Phone screens became brighter and sharper, touch interfaces more fluid, and processors more powerful. The modern smartphone emerged, a small handheld computer that also happened to make calls. With that change, the internet moved into pockets and bags. Maps could draw routes in real time. Messages could be sent from trains, parks, and cafe tables. News, music, and videos could be accessed while standing in line or riding in a taxi. The boundary between online and offline blurred even further. Apps appeared for almost every purpose: chatting, working, exercising, meditating, learning, ordering food, hailing rides. Location services allowed phones to know roughly where they were, enabling turn-by-turn directions and nearby recommendations. Cameras, always connected, turned into portals for sharing moments instantly, letting people broadcast pieces of their lives to friends or to the world. For the network itself, this meant accommodating far more connections, each moving between cell towers as users walked and traveled. Fifth-generation 5G technologies pushed speeds higher and delays lower, preparing for a future with not just phones and computers online, but also sensors, vehicles, and everyday objects. And yet, even at this scale, the same core idea continued to guide everything. Packets traveling between devices and servers, routed over shared infrastructure, all following rules that had been defined decades earlier. Now, as your own phone rests nearby, it is a quiet doorway into this vast, constantly shifting environment. You can choose, for this moment, to leave that door closed, letting the notifications wait while you drift further into calm. With the network always at hand, new forms of community emerged, not only in neighborhoods and workplaces, but among people who might never share the same physical space. Early online communities formed around mailing lists and bulletin boards, where text posts were organized into threads. Later, forums, blogs, and social networks created more structured spaces for conversation and sharing. Each platform became a kind of digital town square, shaped by its design and its culture. People gathered around hobbies, professions, languages, and experiences. Programmers helped each other solve problems. Artists shared their work and asked for feedback. Fans of books, games, and films found others who loved the same things. Support groups formed where people could talk about health, grief, or personal challenges, often with a sense of anonymity that made honesty easier. These spaces offered comfort and connection, especially to those who felt isolated in their offline lives. A person in one country could find a friend in another, united by a shared interest or struggle. Yet the same tools that made kindness easy also made conflict easy. Disagreements could spread rapidly, amplified by algorithms that rewarded attention and engagement. Misinformation traveled quickly, sometimes faster than careful corrections. The line between genuine discussion and performance blurred. Researchers and designers began to think more deeply about how online environments affect mood, behavior, and discourse. Some platforms experimented with features to slow down interactions, encourage reflection, or reduce harmful content. Others focused on giving users more control over what they saw. Throughout it all, the underlying technology remained neutral. The network did not judge the messages it carried. It simply moved bits from one place to another, faithfully delivering whatever people chose to send. As you breathe gently, you can think of the Internet as a wide, many-sided mirror. It reflects curiosity and creativity, but also fear and frustration. What appears in that reflection depends not only on chips and cables, but on human choices, large and small, made every day. Behind the visible world of websites and apps lies another, quieter layer of the Internet story, the question of who guides it. Unlike a single utility company or centralized authority, the Internet is governed by a loose constellation of organizations, technical groups, companies, and governments. No one person can flip a switch and change it all at once, yet many different entities can influence how it grows and how it feels to use. Technical standards, the detailed rules for how protocols work, are often developed in open working groups. Engineers and experts from around the world join mailing lists, meetings, and drafting sessions. They debate how to improve security, how to handle congestion, how to support new kinds of applications. The process can be slow and careful, but its openness helps ensure that no single company owns the basic building blocks. Domain names, the human readable addresses like example.org, are coordinated through a global system overseen by organizations such as ICANN. Registries manage top-level domains. Registrars help users register names, and name servers translate those names into numerical IP addresses. It is a layered system, built to be robust and distributed. Internet service providers and backbone operators manage the physical and commercial aspects of connectivity. Which routes data will take, how much capacity to build, how to price access. Their choices shape who can get online at what speed and at what cost. Governments, meanwhile, set laws and regulations that affect privacy, data protection, censorship, and competition. Some emphasize open access and freedom of expression. Others impose tighter controls, filtering or blocking certain content. The result is not a single, uniform experience, but a patchwork of policies resting on shared technical foundations. As you let your thoughts drift, you might imagine this governance less as a strict hierarchy and more as a shifting conversation. Many voices around many tables, sometimes cooperating, sometimes disagreeing, all influencing the pathways along which your data quietly flows. For all its reach and sophistication, the Internet is not invulnerable. It can falter, fragment, and fail. Sometimes a construction crew accidentally cuts through a buried fiber optic cable and a region loses connectivity until repairs are made. At other times, misconfigured routing tables send data along inefficient or broken paths, causing slowdowns or outages that ripple across providers. Power failures in key data centers can briefly silence major services. Natural disasters, storms, earthquakes, floods can damage infrastructure, taking down lines and equipment. Cyber attacks can overwhelm servers with traffic or exploit software vulnerabilities to disrupt operations. In these moments, the Internet reveals its physical and human underpinnings, cables that can break, machines that can fail, people who can make mistakes. To reduce these risks, engineers design resilience into the system. Multiple cables connect important hubs so that traffic can be rerouted. Content delivery networks cache data in many locations, so a video or page can be served from a nearby server even if another goes down. Backup power and replication help keep critical services available. Monitoring systems watch traffic patterns and alert operators when something seems wrong. Automated tools can reroute traffic, spin up new servers, or block malicious activity in response to trouble. After each major incident, teams analyze what happened and adjust their designs to prevent similar failures. Despite these efforts, moments of fragility still occur, reminding us that the Internet is not a magical substance floating in the air, but an intricate, evolving construction. It is strong, but not unbreakable, flexible, but not perfect. As you lie here, you might take comfort in that imperfection. Like a living organism, the network learns, adapts, and recovers. It is maintained by countless people working behind the scenes, many of whom you will never know, quietly keeping the world's conversations flowing. Now, in the soft stillness of your room, we return to the present. The device you are using, whether it is a phone, a tablet, or a computer, is a small doorway into everything we have just traced. The cables on the ocean floor, the routers in data centers, the antennas on rooftops, the satellites overhead, the protocols and standards and names that bind it all together. When you tap a link or press play, you are calling upon decades of ideas and effort. Telegraph lines and early computers, Cold War concerns and research grants, academic collaborations and commercial ventures. All of these threads have woven together into the fabric that now feels so ordinary. The Internet, you know, is not the product of a single breakthrough or a single mind. It is the result of many small decisions. A researcher picking the R symbol for email, an engineer defining how packets are acknowledged, a ship's crew carefully laying a cable across a deep ocean trench, a team at a laboratory designing an easy-to-use web browser. Most of the people who shaped this system worked in quiet offices and labs, often late at night, surrounded by the soft clatter of keyboards and the gentle whir of fans. They were not trying to change the world all at once. They were solving specific problems, step by step, often unaware of how far their work would ultimately reach. As you feel your body sink a little deeper into the mattress, you can let the scale of this whole story fade into the background. The internet becomes again what it was always meant to be: infrastructure, a set of tools and pathways quietly supporting the things you actually care about: relationships, ideas, creativity, and rest. For tonight, it is enough simply to know that this vast, intricate system stands ready outside your window, humming softly while you allow yourself to be still. And so, we have drifted from letters carried by ships to packets moving at the speed of light, from isolated machines to a planetary web, from a small experiment called ARPANET to an internet that touches billions of lives each day. For all its complexity, the internet remains something deeply human. It carries our questions and answers, our work and our play. It holds archives of knowledge and spontaneous bursts of emotion. It stores our photos, our messages, our songs, our stories. Every connection at its heart is one person reaching out and another person receiving. Tonight, you have followed this story not by walking down corridors of machines or unspooling cables, but simply by listening while invisible signals traveled between distant servers and your own device. The subject of our journey, the internet itself, is also the means by which this journey reached you. As the day's thoughts grow softer, you can imagine screens dimming around the world. Some people are just waking up and logging on. Others are closing laptops and putting phones face down. Routers blink steadily in quiet rooms. Data centers hum under cool air. Undersea cables continue their patient work. The network does not sleep, but it does not rush either. It simply waits. You are free to let go of it for now. Notifications, messages, and updates can all remain untouched. The world will continue to move. Conversations will continue to flow. But you do not need to keep pace with them tonight. The world slows, and so do we. Good night.